You have to do something different to get something different, but you also have to think something different to keep something different. In other words, you have to change the pattern of thinking in your brain, so you change the pattern of belief, so therefore you change the pattern in your habits, and guess what? I'm not going to say your new identity. I'm going to say the original truth of your identity starts to come back to light and who God created you to be. Hi, and welcome to the Christ-Driven Woman Podcast, the recommended podcast for Christian female entrepreneurs and really any woman who wants to grow closer to Christ. Whether you are just starting out in business, a seasoned entrepreneur, or a stay-at-home mom, you, sister, were created for far more than you could possibly ask or imagine. I'm Charisse Burton, Christian Certified Master Business and Life Coach, and from my experience growing from beyond the impossible as a teenage runaway to a successful CEO building multiple six-figure businesses across multiple industries, I will teach you how to hit your first 10K month and then go far beyond that using my proven systems. These strategies will help you build a business that defies expectations and also will grow your faith beyond measure. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, and welcome back to this episode of the Christ-Driven Woman Podcast. I'm so glad you guys are here. Hey, let me just first remind you, if you're enjoying the podcasts and if you're getting some great epiphanies, or maybe if it's just making you think a little bit, I would love for you to go and leave a review. That would be awesome. So what we're going to talk about today is the fact that your habits determine your identity. So what exactly does that mean? Because your habits actually start coming from what you believe about yourself and who you believe yourself to be. And I think you've kind of seen that theme throughout this entire endeavor, is that my whole soapbox is that God created you as his child. You're a daughter of the King. But what happens is when we start falling for these beliefs, whatever they are, then we start taking those on as our identity, and we allow those to replace what God already told us, what he already told us, right? Because when we have those consistent beliefs, then that's the identity that we walk in. So we've talked a lot about that, and that just that comes from the Bible. For example, Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. That is absolutely what I'm talking about. What you believe about yourself is the truth. And when we're wanting to change those habits, this is what I was talking about earlier with someone, that we know the phrase that you have to do something different to get something different, right? When you have, let's talk about, weight loss. If you want to start getting healthier, if you want to start losing weight, you have to do something different in your exercise routine. You have to maybe add an exercise routine. You've got to do something different with your eating habits. You have to do something different to get a different result. But so many people stop right there. And what I want you to consider is you have to do something different to get something different. But you also have to think something different to keep something different. In other words, you have to change the pattern of thinking in your brain, so you change the pattern of belief, so therefore you change the pattern in your habits, and guess what? I'm not going to say your new identity. I'm going to say the original truth of your identity starts to come back to light and who God created you to be. I want to read this to you. You know how sometimes you read the Bible and you come across a verse and you're thinking, I don't think I've ever seen that before in my life. So I got to put my glasses on real quick because I want to read this to you. And it is such a beautiful description of who God created us to be. It says, this is Romans chapter 8, verse 29. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. That just blew my mind. I know I've probably seen that before, but it just hit me in the heart, because what he's saying is he created us, but he created Jesus first so that Jesus could literally be our older brother and that we would be conformed into his image because we are the brothers and sisters of Jesus. Again, I know I've heard that before. I know I've read that probably before, but today it just hit me different because that is our true identity. And how often do we allow negative habits or things that we tend to get ourselves into and then walk in that identity? I mean, you could walk in an identity of being in debt. You could walk in an identity of being divorced. You could walk in the identity of being lost. You can walk in the identity of what you choose to believe that overshadows who God created you to be. Maybe you are a divorced woman, but that's not your identity. Maybe you do have debt, but that's not your identity. Now, there are certain things that we can work on changing. Like I said before, we've got to do something different to get something different. But if we don't change our thought process, then we're going to just bounce right back. It's going to be like a rubber band effect. We're going to bounce right back to the same habits, the same patterns that we're stuck in, whether it is physical activity or whether it is a thought process. We've got to do the work, which, by the way, retraining your brain is not easy. I'm just gonna be real with you. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because I grew up with things being said to me like, when people find out how you really are, they're going to leave you, or you're going to be a terrible mom. Your children are going to do horrible things. I won't go into the specifics of what they said they would do, but I mean, I grew up with phrases being said to me like that. So my habit of thinking when I was in a negative space or when my identity was one of fear would be right back to those thoughts. Oh my gosh, when people find out how I really am, they're going to leave me. And of course, I've shared before that just would wreak havoc on our marriage. But that was the thought process that was attached to the identity of fear that I was walking in. So not only was I not aware of it, but when I did become aware of it, it was so hard to change that identity because those habits, those grooves, if you will, in my brain were so concreted into my thought process that any negative thing that would happen with me, oh my gosh, what they said was true. When people find out who I am or find out what I'm really about, they're going to leave me. That would always be my go-to. And there is no truth about that whatsoever. Nothing. But I wasn't changing my thinking to change the habit of what I was believing. So that's why I kind of wanted to go back to your habits are determining your identity. What habitual thought are you thinking that you haven't changed yet? I want you to identify that. I want you to ask yourself. I want you to ask God, tell me what habitual thought, because that's what it is. It's the thought that becomes the habit that becomes the belief. Even when it's not true, it becomes our belief. So we act as if it's true. And then what happens? Sometimes it actually does become true because we're already acting as if it's true. Because as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. So when I started acting like when people found out how I really was, they would leave me, I became very, very, almost secluded. I was very locked up. I surrounded myself with walls, and I thought they were walls of protection because I was protecting myself from ever letting anybody know me, because again, if they did, they would leave. So I didn't want anybody to ever know me. So I had those walls of protection up. And again, like I said, I thought those were walls of protection, but those were walls of isolation. And I put those walls there out of the identity of fear. Has anybody read the book Captivating by Stacey Eldridge? I just got to tell you, that book is amazing. I read it some years ago. It's on my list to pull up and read again. And it talks about that. It talks about the fact that we will build these walls to protect ourselves, but it's not protection. It is actually isolation. And that's where the enemy he loves that. That's his playing ground, is when we isolate ourselves and we start really focusing on the lies that other people have told us or that he has told us, and we really focus on those, then we dig ourselves deeper into that isolation, and the enemy just has a field day. He wreaks havoc with our belief. He wreaks havoc not only in our belief about who we are, he wreaks havoc in our belief about our relationship with God. We start telling ourselves things like, if God really knew me, he wouldn't love me. Or there's no way God loves me because of all these things I know that I've done. We start really believing those lies as if they are truth. And then we start walking as if that is our truth. So I would start believing that people, when they find out how I really am, they're going to leave me. So I would start walking as if that was true. And I'm telling you, it is not easy. It is hard to retrain your brain and develop new thought processes and develop new grooves in your brain. It's difficult. It's difficult. But that consistent belief, good or bad, becomes your truth. And that becomes the habit, which therein becomes your identity. So I want to go back to that question. What habitual thought are you thinking that does not align with who Christ says you are? I don't care if it is in your business, if it is in your home. I want you to even understand that your identity first is one of a daughter of the King. So many times we can get wrapped up in we can get wrapped up in our business, and our identity can become who we are in our job or our career. We can get wrapped up in being a mom, and that can become our identity. And when we do that, and I've done both those things, I'm just telling you, I'm speaking from experience. I'm not calling anybody else out on something that I haven't done. So I'm familiar with that. But what's happening is we are allowing the enemy to replace who God says we are with what we think is, or what we're being told is most important. And, being a mom is great. Being good at your career is wonderful. But when we take it to the point of making it our identity, we have replaced who God says we are. That is where the problem starts. That's where we start losing ourselves. That's where we start building an isolation. We start isolating ourselves in that identity. And that's what we know ourselves as, instead of the whole person, instead of being a daughter of the King, instead of knowing we are the sister of Jesus. as it says, I just read to you in Romans. Y'all got to go read that if you haven't. It is just powerful. You are the sister of Jesus, first and foremost. God created him to be your older sibling. And then he has given us the ability to be a great mom or to have gifts and talents to be great at our career. He wants us to use all those things, but not to the point that it replaces who he is to us. That reminds me of what I was thinking earlier. I take all kinds of notes all the time, just trying to think, make sure that I'm speaking the words that God wants me to speak. I don't know who needs to hear this. Maybe one person out there needs to hear this, and I hope that's true. But even when we are trying to grow and get better and reach new goals, what if it is the strength? What if it is the growth that we develop in him that is the most important thing, which I think we all agree it is. Yes, there's great goals that we can achieve. Yes, he wants us to be successful. He created us to be successful. He wants us to be good parents. He wants us to pour into our children. He wants us to be good stewards of our money. He wants us to be good in our career. But the growth it takes in us to get to those places, that's the true success. And it should never overshadow who God created us to be. So what is that habitual thought that you're thinking? There might be more than one. I usually have more than one. So what are those habitual thoughts that you're thinking that are sort of canceling out or not in alignment with what God says? Ask him and write them down. Ask him and write them down. And then I want you to write down the truth. So for example, I'll share with you one of the things that, like I said earlier, I shared with you that I was always told, or I was told multiple times growing up, when people find out how you really are, they're going to leave you. And I've shared this on other podcasts before because that's probably the biggest lie that has done more damage in my life than anything else. But that I recognize it as a lie. So the truth, the actual truth is this. When people get to know me and find out how I really am, they are going to fall more in love with me because they're going to see Jesus. That's the truth. That's what the enemy didn't want me to know. When people find out how I really am, they are going to fall more in love with me because they're going to see Jesus. They're going to see Jesus. And that's what I want for you, my friend. I want you to know whose you are, but I want you to know who you are. You are a daughter of the King, and you are the sister of Jesus. So write those things down. Ask the Lord what beliefs you're habitually, or what thoughts you're habitually thinking that have become your identity, and then ask him the truth. All right? Okay, my friends, tell me what really hit you about this episode. I would love, love, love to know. And again, if you haven't yet, I would absolutely love it if you would go and leave a review. All right. See you next time. Hey, thank you so much for being here today and listening. Please leave a review and tell me what hit your heart the most. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to partner with me and the production of this podcast, just head over to this Patreon link. Thanks so much.